Dacia's Sandero could very well completely change the way you think about budgeting for a compact family five-door car. It's half the cost of many similarly sized models and surprisingly class competitive in many areas, given the shockingly affordable prices being asked. This car is shaking up the market, and it's easy to see why. Sometimes I think I must have been born in the wrong era. Is it just me, or does everything these days seem to cost rather more than it should? Take, for example, the purchase of a compact family car, the kind that most people want, with room for up to 5, a modern engine and a decent-sized 300-litre boot. Today, the mainstream manufacturers have decreed that you'll pay from between £14,000 to £15,000 for such a thing. But one brand disagrees: Dacia. For much less than half those kind of asking figures, this fresh-to-the-market Renault-owned Romanian marque can bring you this car, the Sandero. Here's a model nearly as big as a Focus-size family hatch, for less than the price of a tiny city car. So it's little wonder then that Dacia is Europe's fastest-growing automotive manufacturer. It was first founded in 1966, but the company only really took off when acquired by Renault in 1999 as an ultra-affordable brand for developing markets. It was for these countries that its first modern-era product, the Logan Saloon, was launched in 2004. It cost a mere €5,000 and it sold like hotcakes. And that encouraged the marque to launch a five-door version 4 years later, badged the Sandero. By now, the bigger, more sophisticated European countries were surprising Renault management by also clamouring for Dacias, a demand that took so long to satisfy that it wasn't until early 2013 that the brand could be properly launched here. And by then, a second-generation Sandero had been launched, a smarter step up from the Spartan original with more modern engine wear and more up-to-date equipment. The pricing approach, though, was familiar. Thousands of pounds lower than similarly sized competitors, delivering to British buyers a new car for less than the price of many comparable used ones. If you're looking for the catch, well, to be honest, so am I. So why don't we check this model out? This, in its most affordable form, is Britain's most affordable new car, an accolade that tends to lower your expectations when it comes to ride and handling. And that's an opinion that's likely to be reinforced by news of underpinnings dating back to the turn of the century. But of course, the dynamic needs of likely Dacia buyers will be modest, to say the least, with a perspective that, like mine, will be further tempered by asking price realism. So no, of course, a Sandero doesn't ride and handle like a current Ford Focus. You feel the bumps just as you would in an old Astra or an Escort. But that's to be expected. Apart from anything else, this car has to tackle the unsealed roads of backward nations like Morocco and Iran. So there would have been no point whatsoever in giving it fancy, modern, multi-link mechanicals. Still, the robust suspension setup provided is perfectly adequate for ordinary A to B driving. And you'll find body roll to be actually reasonably well controlled if you feel that you really must throw this thing through the corners. I wouldn't be quite so forgiving in reference to the slightly bulky 5-speed gear change or the lifeless steering, although the helm is at least light, offering a city-friendly 10.58 metre turning circle. It's in town that you'll be most frequently pressing this eco button, which will then limit your engine's pulling power in return for extra frugality. Better than expected, though, is refinement. Much improved in this second-generation Sandero by the more extensive use of better quality soundproofing materials where it counts, namely around the windscreen and under the bonnet. And talking of the engine bay, what should you expect? Rather a mixed bag is the answer to that. None of the units on offer are going to enchant your ears, but they go about their business with differing charms. The cheapest 75 brake horsepower 1.2 litre petrol power plant that entry-level buyers have to have is resolutely old tech but smooth to operate, easing to 62 miles per hour in 14.5 seconds, and it's perfectly happy then to cruise at the legal limit before running out of puff at 97 miles per hour. Very different though is the other petrol option, a pokier state-of-the-art 90 brake horsepower, 3-cylinder, 0.9 TCE unit. That thrums confidently to 62 in 11.1 seconds, at the same time as being far more efficient and frugal. Priciest is the DCI 90 diesel, which is a second tardier to 62 miles per hour, and with a maximum speed of 107 miles per hour. It's slightly slower flat out, but it feels faster thanks to nearly 50% more torque, more pulling power. To understand the styling of this car, you also have to understand the way it will be sold to you. In most cases in the UK, Dacia models will sit in the corner of Renault showrooms. It's important then that designs from this Romanian brand are seen as a fundamentally different proposition from their pricier French counterparts. So, you'll seek in vain for the kind of swooping avant-garde panel work that characterises, say, the French brand's fourth generation Clio. Instead, you can look at bluff, tough, functional aesthetics that are supposed to suggest Volkswagen's Polo, but don't quite manage to. It's clean and smart to look at though, and one that doesn't automatically classify you as a budget buyer. Under the skin, there are the same basic underpinnings you'll find on any Dacia model, based on a floor plan dating all the way back to the second generation Clio of 1998. To be fair though, much of the mechanical stuff has been redesigned since then, and your first impressions of the car are of something clean and modern. The front end, for example, has a neatly rounded, coordinated feel with large headlights and a very imposing grille. And what about cost cutting? Well, some of it matters, like the flimsy feel of the door handles, but some of it doesn't. Like the way that to cut production costs at the Romanian factory, the Sandero's side glazing is identical to that of Dacia's other Logan and Duster models. And inside, well, you really can't get away from the fact that never before has such a small price bought you so much space. Here in the back, 3 adults would be a bit of a squash, but seating them would be possible, and a trio of kids would be absolutely fine. It all feels far more like a Focus-size family hatch than a Fiesta-size Super Mini to me, and that can only be a good thing. An impression that continues here when you come to examine the boot. There are 320 litres on offer here, and if you compare that to the 276 litres of a Fiesta and the 316 litres of a Ford Focus. Pushing forward, the split folding rear bench increases that to an absolutely massive 1200 litres. That compares to 960 litres in a Fiesta and 1101 litres in a Focus. So, you get the idea. It's a decent size we've got here, and massively bigger than the kind of 200 litre boot you would typically expect in the kind of city car that would normally be priced more closely to Sandero levels. As for the feeling you get up front, well, it does rather depend on the trim level you've chosen. At base access level, it really does feel a bit drab, but plusher variants like this one feel much lifted by carefully integrated splashes of chrome, for example. Soft touch plastics, as you might expect, are notable by their absence, but it all feels well screwed together and built to last. Practical as well, with plenty of cup holders front and rear, plus good front door bins that are capable of holding decent sized 1.5 litre bottles. Are there issues? Yes, but relatively minor ones. For example, the optional media nav screen on the centre console here attracts reflections, and annoyingly the Speedo doesn't have even number speed designations for 20, 40, 60 miles per hour and so on. And the electric window switches are shoved down here at the bottom of the centre console, rather on their usual more ergonomic place on the door handles. On the plus side though, the seats are comfortable and the 3-spoke wheel here feels good to hold, even if it isn't reach adjustable. So on the whole, it's a surprisingly positive scorecard. The Sandero buying proposition is pretty straightforward. 3 main engines, 3 main trim levels, and a single 5-door body style that's a bit bigger than a Fiesta size Super Mini, but a wee bit smaller than a Focus size family hatch. All supplied at pricing that from launch was pitched in the £6,000 to £10,000 bracket. And that makes the entry-level access version of this model Britain's cheapest new car. That access variant comes only with 1.2 litre petrol power, but the plusher mid-range ambience and flagship Laureate spec levels that most British buyers will want expand the engine choice quite considerably. With these, if you're considering the petrol 1.2, it's worth remembering that only £600 more will get you the extra poke and frugality of the 90 brake horsepower 0.9 litre petrol TCE unit, and that £1,800 more will get you Britain's cheapest diesel and sub 100 grams per kilometre CO2 car. That's called the Sandero DCI 90. These two more desirable engines are the only ones offered in a parallel model, which is called the Sandero Stepway. It's basically the same car with a more aggressive crossovery look, a ride height that's 40mm higher and a £600 price premium. Which brings me to the point where I must put this kind of pricing into perspective. Now, everyone would agree that this product is much bigger than the tiny city cars it's supposedly priced against. So I won't spend too long in comparison with models in this smallest market segment, although I can't resist pointing out that the cheapest 5-door versions of typical city cars like Citroën C1 or Volkswagen's Up are around 40% more expensive than an entry-level Sandero. Beyond that, it doesn't really matter whether you view this Dacia as a Fiesta-size Super Mini or a slightly larger Focus-style family hatch, neither of which offer as much boot space. The savings are vast either way. If you take a 5-door version of either of these two Ford models powered by a comparably performing engine, then in rough terms, you'd be looking at paying approximately double the cost of a base 1.2 litre petrol Sandero. I don't think I need to say much more than that, do I? If, after careful consideration, you conclude that this is the car that your family really needs, then you'll want to complete a wise buying decision by opting for a variant representing the perfect value proposition, with regard to which you'd think that the least expensive access model would be the one to have. After all, choose something plusher and you'd be expecting to dilute the very affordability that probably made you want to consider a Dacia in the first place. Perhaps, but adding £600 to the asking price of the baseline model, that's the amount required to progress from access to mid-range ambience trim, really doesn't dilute the value proposition very much. And it will make a huge difference to the look and feel of the car that's eventually going to end up in your driveway. So with an ambience trim Sandero, you won't get grey plastic bumpers with commercial vehicle overtones. You won't be restricted to a single paint colour, white. You won't have to wind up your own front windows. You won't have to curse the lack of central locking when you leave the car on the street somewhere. And you won't have to whistle or talk to yourself as you drive along because there will be a CD stereo to entertain you. Amazingly, the base model has nothing. Other welcome ambience features include audio controls behind the leather-trimmed steering wheel, an auxiliary input and a USB port, Bluetooth compatibility for your phone, and a bit of chrome trim to lift the look and feel of the cabin. And as with all Sanderos at this level, you get daytime running lights, tinted glass, a 12-volt power socket and split folding rear seats. And what about air conditioning? Well, it's rather frustrating that you have to stretch to the top of the range Laureate trim model I have here for that. Aircon isn't even an option further down the range, nor below Laureate level can you specify the optional 7-inch media nav system that I have here, that for just £250 more packs in sat-nav with the stereo and Bluetooth functions. Dacia clearly want to push buyers into finding the extra £1,400 necessary to go from ambience to Laureate trim. Still, That does at least entitle you to alloy wheels, cruise control, a trip computer, power adjustable body coloured mirrors, height adjustment for the driver's seat and wheel, and a couple of extra speakers for the stereo. And all of that at a price that for the 1.2 litre model is still well below that demanded by many base level city cars. Options are few. Although rather surprisingly on such a budget-minded car, you can specify leather upholstery. Otherwise, it's a case of choosing between a couple of accessory packages. The protection pack gives you an alarm, a book liner and rear parking sensors, while the touring pack offers transverse roof bars, a luggage net and a front armrest. As for safety, well, Dacia isn't a top performer in this respect, but all models do get twin front and side airbags, Isofix child seat fastenings, ESC stability control and the usual electronic assistance for traction and braking. If Britain had received this car in first generation guise, I'd be talking here of the Sandero's major catch, high running costs. But I can't even do that, for with the Mark II design, the under-bonnet stuff has taken a big step forward. Yes, you still can get the ageing 75 brake horsepower, 1.2 litre 16-valve petrol unit on baseline models, but even that gets close to the combined cycle of 50 miles per gallon mark these days, although the 135 grams per kilometre of CO2 reading is poor if you compare it to modern standards. But modern standards have been very much matched elsewhere in the range, primarily with an engine clever than you'll find on some super minis and family hatchbacks, 2 or 3 times as expensive as this one. I do refer, of course, to the 90 brake horsepower, 0.9 litre 3-cylinder TCE petrol unit, which was originally developed for the 4th generation Renault Clio, and it's now fitted here in its Romanian cousin. Despite its extra power, it is far cleaner and more frugal than the base 1.2, managing 54.3 miles per gallon on the combined cycle and 116 grams per kilometre of CO2. If you want to do even better than that, then you want the engine I'm using here, the 90 brake horsepower DCI 90 diesel, which is the UK's most affordable diesel car. This manages an impressive 74.3 miles per gallon on the combined cycle and 99 grams per kilometre of CO2. That means that the 50 litre fuel tank could take you over 830 miles, which is more than 200 miles further up the road than any of the petrol Sanderos might deliver. In order to maximise that frugality, there is the option for the Sandero TCE and DCI buyers of pushing this dash-mounted eco button, which restricts engine pulling power and tweaks the air conditioning to improve efficiency by as much as 10%. Of course, calculating the cost of ownership is not all about purchase prices and fuel efficiency stats. Take depreciation for instance. Since a Dacia doesn't cost much in the first place, you're never going to lose much. Then there's peace of mind. Reliability surveys Europe-wide have suggested that the build quality and reliability of this car is every bit as good as the Romanians promise. To survive in markets like those in North Africa and South America, of course, this car was always going to have to be pretty stoutly built. On to the warranty. Dacia offers an industry standard 3-year, 60,000 miles guarantee from the showroom, backed of course by 3 years or 60,000 miles of roadside assistance. For a further £400 you can extend the cover by 2 years, or for twice as much you can up the period covered to a Kia equalling 7 years and 100,000 miles. Service intervals are every year or every 12,000 miles, and since most Renault dealers look after Dacias too, you shouldn't be too far from a specialist workshop. It also helps that there's a timing chain that will last as long as the engine, so that only leaves insurance groupings. They range from 2 to 10 depending on which particular model you buy. In the motor industry, we all thought we knew what a value brand was. And then Dacia came along and changed that concept forever. Even the Chinese will struggle to compete with a costing proposition as efficient as that offered by this Sandero. Did I say efficient? Should I have said austere? Not really. The early Dacias we never saw here may have been as aesthetically appealing as a Bulgarian thrift store, but today, if cost, circumstance or sheer good sense force you into this corner of the market, then you're likely to find models like this one surprisingly acceptable. If for you a car is simply a functional implement, a domestic tool that, like any other, must justify its expenditure, then this one fits the bill perfectly. It's solid, spacious and family friendly for the kind of money you'd normally pay for a tiny city scoot. It offers pretty much everything you need and nothing that you don't. There's extra equipment if you really want it, and even a bit of high tech for petrol TCE customers. All at pricing pitched to severely embarrass the established market players. Their products are still more sophisticated, but the gap isn't that huge. Except, of course, when it comes to what you have to pay.